So there's been a lot of chatter this week ever since the Ohio State game. It started with the Penn State whiteout game, or not whiteout game, the Penn State game being at noon against Ohio State. So do you like Big Ten kickoffs? Ohio State fans, Penn State fans are very frustrated right now. And for some people, it's like, this is trivial. Why are you complaining about this? Ohio State does end the season on 6 straight noon games. 5 of those 6 are big noon kickoff. I think the first of those was the Nebraska Ohio State game. Meanwhile, Michigan State is begging for anything but a night game. They've played so many night games so far this season. So
Yep.
everybody's feeling a little indifferent about the scheduling so far, I think. But what's your thoughts on these big noon kickoffs and some of the drama that's kind of gone around that?
So I understand, like I saw Joe Klatt tweet about this earlier, and he's talking about, it's watched by so many people and all this. It's this big window. It's if it was bad for college football, I'd say it, whatever. But it's good for but all that tells me is it's good for TV, right? It's good for them to be able to get viewership. It's good for Fox. But I don't necessarily think it's good for the fans. It just, there's something about, the prime time games between the best teams that just it's just synonymous with prime time. You know what I'm saying? Like the best teams playing at night in prime time under the lights, the crowd's more electric. I just think giving good teams the opportunity to be able to play in those big game moments, I think some of that's being taken away by this big noon kickoff. And you got teams like you're talking about that are just scheduled for so many of them that it's just like, can you throw us a bone here every now and then? And like, understand that you got to give a juxtaposed position and give a balance to fans and what they want and networks and what they want. But the problem is right now is it's money, and Fox and the Big Ten had this in their agreement. So it is what it is. At the end of the day, the Big Ten wanted this, Fox wanted it. That's what gives them money. And that's what, the Big Ten is. That's what college football is now. It's money. And so unfortunately, I don't think it's good for the fans. But it's good for the networks. And, at that point, it is what it is. We're against the machine in that regard.
Totally, totally. I see where Joel Klatt is coming from to an extent, right? I mean, they were
I do.
trying to revitalize this noon window that had hardly any good games in it for years, right? I mean,
Yeah.
this was a window that never really had any big games, but there was a reason why. It's because nobody was putting primetime games on that time slot because the viewership wasn't great. Lo and
Exactly.
behold, you put big games on there now. The viewership does get better. I think Texas, Michigan did 9 million some, which is good, but you also see the SEC putting out like 13 million TV ratings once or twice a year on ABC, ESPN, some of those networks. And so for me, like, I get where Big Noon is coming from, trying to put these games out there and help themselves a little bit, but like at the end of the day, if you're confident in what you have, you should be willing to go up against the SEC,
Yeah.
right? I mean, we saw a night game between Ohio State and Oregon. It was one of the most watched games of the year, right?
Hmm.
I mean, and there were other SEC games that night as well. It wasn't like there was Georgia Alabama or anything like that, but still, there were other SEC games to watch that night as well. And the Big Ten still did well because it was two of the Big Ten's premier products. I mean, Justin, imagine if Ohio State and Nebraska had played each other at Big Noon and we had the situation we thought where Nebraska was undefeated going against Ohio State. So
Yeah.
there were a lot of people talking about that
Yep.
possibility, and Nebraska was not bad. I mean, they were what, 5-3
Five.
when they were facing Ohio State, kind of on the brink,
Uh,
or 5-2.
two. Two.
5-2. Okay. They were kind of on the brink of being ranked a little bit.
Hmm.
They had been ranked earlier in the year. They could get back to being ranked. And so that was a game with a lot of viewership, but I couldn't imagine if they had Ohio State, Nebraska at noon, and it was 7-0 versus, or 6-1 versus 7-0
Yeah.
in that one. Like, that would have been, fans would
Yep.
have been upset for sure.
Oh, 100%. Because it's two huge fan base viewerships. Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't have been happy with that. And two, because I'm in Arizona. Like now, everybody around me does daylight savings, but before that, I'm 2 hours ahead. So
Hmm.
morning games are very morning for me,
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's another
And
reason I don't like it.
I get where some people are coming from. We got Terry who says, I like not having to wait to see my team play.
I
Terry,
get that.
I agree with you personally as a fan who watches at home. Listen, I don't
Yeah.
live in Ohio, so I don't go to as many Ohio State games as those other fans that do. but I also don't like watching the game where it feels like the crowd is dead the entire game,
Yeah.
right? And then you start comparing it to the other games where you're like, oh my gosh, look at what Nebraska has at their night games. Look at what Oregon has at their night games. And you're like,
Yeah.
and we got
It
people
sucks
coming in
waiting.
still sipping coffee, you know?
Yeah. I think we can all admit it sucks waiting till night, but
Right.
at the end of the day, it's for the best. And you get the most eyes on you. The recruits are watching you. More majority of the recruits are going to be watching the primetime games, most likely. And so, there's a lot of things that I think are cons to it, but and most of the pros mainly benefit the networks. But there are a couple of things like that. You don't have to wait to watch your team play. When I'm out, even at Nebraska in Lincoln for the games, I'm like, if it's a night game, I'm like, I kind of wish it was earlier because I'm ready to get in there and go crazy. But then when I get to the night atmosphere, I'm like, yeah, never mind.
Yeah.
We're in here now.
And as an Ohio State fan, I've been kind of focusing in on the big noons a little bit more just because that's kind of the trending topic for Ohio State fans right now. But I do think there is a conversation as well, and this has been affecting the Penn State fans more, is the broadcast they had for the whiteout on Peacock. Listen,
Oh my God.
I appreciate that NBC believed enough in the Big Ten to try and try to build their Peacock product off of it. I'm not trying to complain that somebody believed in the Big Ten and spent money on it, but we cannot be putting the whiteout on Peacock, especially when you are going to present the whiteout the way you presented it. We saw hardly any crowd shots. We saw hardly any of the light show. I mean, they did not present it. They did a disservice to it. You didn't see the fans in the stands on the on the front row and some of that stuff that was going on. I mean, I saw better pictures and I saw better shots of the game in the photo gallery after the game than I did on TV.
And Penn State's Twitter.
Yeah, Penn State's Twitter.
I mean, they did a good job of it. Yeah.
I mean, I forget what year that was. Was it 17 or 18 when I think it was ESPN had the whiteout for some reason. I forget who they were playing, but ESPN, as much grief as I give ESPN, and I don't like ESPN, okay? But as much grief as I give them, that was one of the most perfect productions,
their production's good,
of the whiteout, that I had ever seen. And I still play that clip on Twitter from time to time. If I can find it again, I'll do that. But for me, like, yes, Big Noon, for Ohio State fans and Penn State fans right now, it's a big deal. But even for like Indiana fans right now, I would think you would have liked what you saw in the Michigan Indiana game with the bright as you started the game, and then kind of as the game got closer into it, it got darker, and you felt that kind of feel of all that was going on. And I saw people taking pictures and showing the video. Guess how many videos and pictures they showed of the beginning of the game versus the end of the game? Whole lot more at the end of the game because that's the feel, right?
That's when it starts to become an issue, is when those games are so big for those schools, right? And then it starts to kind of hurt the university in a little bit of a way, because Penn State needs to showcase those whiteout games. Again, recruits watch these games. Recruits see what's going on. The national, more people are being drawn to college football. Like, put these on display and bring people to the sport. Stop, hiding them on Peacock. And like you said, Peacock is completely unprepared. Their production team is handling this like it's Purdue versus, UCLA. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to they beat us. I get it. But the first thing popped in my head. But that's how they're treating it. It's preposterous to me how you have a production crew of that level and they can't figure that out. But yeah, it was pretty bad. Pretty bad.
Yeah. Cameron, we appreciate you being here. He says, as an Ohio State fan, gotta love our only primetime game was at home versus Western Michigan this year. Yeah, Ohio State played 3 night games this year: Oregon, Michigan State, and Western Michigan. Western Michigan was the only home game. Now, I will say, I've not had this confirmed, but from what I've heard, Gene Smith, the previous athletic director for Ohio State, did want to prevent 7:30 kickoffs at Ohio State because of how cold it got. I think that's bogus. For me, I'm not looking all at
that's advantageous for Ohio State against some of these other teams, right?
Exactly.
They should love that.
Exactly. I mean, I still think like a 3:30 kick for like an Indiana game would be really cool, especially with what Indiana has become this year and how big of a game that's going to be. That's going to be a top 5 matchup in both the AP poll and the college football playoffs. As long as everything happens, okay this weekend, but that's going to be very disheartening, I think, for a lot of the fans who are going to that game. And I think most
Yeah,
Indiana fans would agree that, maybe it's not disheartening for them, but yeah, it'd probably be cooler to go see the game at night than it would be
exactly.
at noon.
It's a hell of an experience. Yeah.
Yeah.